Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's someone, and welcome back to another story time. Firstly, thank you for 24,000 subscribers. Yet another big milestone, and here's another story time to go along with that. Now, I mentioned this story in a post earlier this year, because I thought we were going to be ready with this story around 20,000 or something like that. But looking at things again, and remembering everything, I realized there were a couple other stories left in the Chapter 1 playlist. That playlist, Chapter 1 Beginnings of a Psychonaut, is a series where I introduce myself to different substances and how I made the conscious decision to embark in the study of psychonautics. And we did like 13 different substances or something like that, I believe. In the last video we dropped, which I believe was a dream herb, I did state that that was the final episode in that series, which technically, based off the dates, it is the final episode. But I did find one other story I do have to tell ya that'll fit in Chapter 1. But that story will be for a future video, as that experience is more of a mild one. Today we're bringing out that story I mentioned in that post, which this is the time Evan and I combined Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds, LSA, with the over-the-counter cough-suppressant dissociative dextromethorphan, DXM. Now I highly recommend you go check out that Chapter 1 playlist so you have a better idea of our situation and the things that led up to the story. At the very least, I recommend you check out our first time trying LSA, and also our first time trying DXM. To say the least, our behavior at this time was somewhat reckless, as we were highly interested in having experiences to the point where we didn't have a lot of patience for it. One thing that we would talk about a lot is still having a strong ass trip, where we would see all kinds of in-depth hallucinations. And while we did have many trippy moments and effects thus far, it wasn't what some may call a full-fledged experience. Basically to the point where you just kinda lose yourself. Which we did have plans to either find another psychedelic or to attempt the LSA again, but this time with a cold water extraction. Now I kept telling this dude Evan about the tolerance aspect of psychedelics, which there's even a video I made on this for what happens when you trip without a tolerance. And basically, you can get some effects, but mostly it's going to be like half the experience you would get otherwise. But I'm bringing this up because this experience took place only 3 days after we first tried the seeds. Which, coincidentally, that's the same thing that happened when we did the 1P LSD. We tried taking 1P LSD again 3 days after the first time we tried it. But Evan was just really anxious to have a strong ass experience, I guess. Because with me, I was pretty fine with waiting it out for the right time. But I was also fine with going along with what he wanted to do this day and dive deep into a substance. You could say I was down for whatever really. But take us to this early afternoon of this day, and Evan randomly hits me up with a text saying this: I think I want to try to combine the LSA with DXM, LOL. Which, this surprised me, because he hadn't really brought up anything about the DXM since we had last done it. But now out of nowhere, he wants to do it in a combination. Which I think the main reason was that he didn't get the trip he was looking for with our last HBWR trip, because it wasn't a super visual experience like that. But the DXM on the other hand could be just the right factor to spice things up. And so when he said that, of course we started diving into research about the combo. We basically found that most experiences will lead to some of the worst nausea you'll ever have. Which the seeds alone were some of the worst nausea I've ever had. So we should have taken this factor more seriously, because this is one of the worst cases of nausea I've ever gone through. Probably the worst concerning power. But we talk about how much we should do, and the thing with me was that I really wanted to reach the second plateau if we were going to do DXM. And with the gel caps we got, we would have had to take in around 30 pills, where last time we did 20. Evan wasn't so keen on taking 30 of them, but he also did note that we should probably take more seeds than we did last time to make sure they fully hit us, considering our tolerance. So he was saying that we should at least take 12 seeds, and not as high as 15 or even 20 of them. And looking back at this now, this is just a recipe for disaster on your stomach. But he was saying I do 30 pills and he'll take 20 seeds and 10 pills. Then we just talk about all these ridiculous numbers and combos, but we would end up doing the exact same amount. So after texting about this, he comes through to pick me up to go dose at his place. It was a cloudy day out this day, being rather great. Anyways, we get to his crib and no one is there but his dogs. Whenever I go over there, he has this chihuahua that would always be yapping at me. We go to his room, do some more research, and talk about what dose we should actually do, and how to do it. I was pretty set on doing that cold water extraction method, and he was down to try it considering how bad the seeds were chewed up. I had already gotten the DXM caps a week or so back, so those were ready when we were. I had exactly enough to split 30 each for us if that's what we wanted to go for. But first we got the seeds ready for the extraction. Evan already had a mortar and pestle on hand, so it wasn't too bad of a process to crush the seeds up. Then we put it in water to sit for a little. Now we should have let this sit for a whole lot longer for the extraction process to work more efficiently, but we only waited about an hour before deciding to dose. While waiting, we decided to take the DXM. I was pretty set on doing 30, and Evan saw that I was persistent about doing that much, so he said fuck it and that he'll be right there with me, and does 32. We downed the pills, and this was the easy part. Though I will say I did feel a little queasy swallowing that many pills, but I wasn't looking forward to taking that LSA one bit, so I just focused more on having a strong trip and tried to ignore it. But we just hang out a bit, and when about an hour rolls around, we decided to take the extraction. We strained it and put it in 2 cups. It looked like piss pretty much. It had turned this faint yellow when we put the seeds in, kinda almost like beer. And I don't really know which is worse, the taste of the extraction or the seeds themselves. Probably the seeds since they linger more, but that extraction tasted so foul. And I don't think he had any sweeteners or anything like that, but I don't think it would have made a difference because of how strong it was. Like it's something you take a sip of and your face just winces hard as hell, making you want to spit it out immediately. But of course you don't, because it is a psychedelic substance and you're trying to trip your hardest. I drank most of it somehow, and Evan drank about half of his. He got us some soda to backwash it with, and this did make it somewhat manageable. But thing is, we were talking about how the LSA may not hit us like that, because of how short we let them soak. So just to make sure, we decided straight up to eat like 8 or 9 seeds. And honestly, this is probably what fucked over our stomachs hardcore. For me, I feel like it was the taste that did it, but really it had to be everything together. So Evan told me he had to drop me off because he still had to go to dance practice yet. And in a couple hours he would come back to pick me up with some of our other friends. And he had no idea how hard this would hit. Even I didn't expect what was coming, but I already had a feeling he wasn't going to be good for dance practice. It had maybe been a half hour or so since we had dosed the DXM, and we left right after we took the seeds. It was about a 10 to 15 minute ride to my place. So in this time, we were coming up on the DXM, and both Evan and I could feel it coming in heavy. We were driving down the same road we had driven on when we were freaking out on the 1P LSD, and I remembered of this and felt a similar vibe set in, but much different than that time too. Like it was the same vibe, but on a different pillar if that makes sense. But mainly what became a concern for both of us was our stomach contents, as it was full of gel caps plus the LSA seeds. And the nausea was rising quick, which what had really put this into place for me I feel like was the driving. Just that motion going about. Evan was trying to make it quick back to my crib, but you can only go so fast when you're in traffic. And just looking back at this, man, I just laugh at this shit because it was so ridiculous. Like we were just some dumbasses, lacking hard as hell on these 2 substances. Like really, I just don't see how this would be a decent time unless you did like a pure extraction or something. But we were already too far in at this point, and had to face what was coming next. I remember as we started getting close to my crib, I started to have hallucinations. Tracers of the car in front of us, to be specific. Then I feel like the color around me got saturated a bit, and red started to pop out a lot stronger. The 2 brake lights on the cars in front of us would look like 2 beams because of this, and also stop signs and red lights would pop out hard. And that last turn, I remember so much. Like it stands out strongly in my memory for whatever reason. But it was like a turning point I think, both mentally and on my stomach, because I knew I would not be able to keep this all down. Like I've talked about LSA and how eating Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds can be hell on your stomach, and this was just a powerful, forceful nausea. Like this concoction should never go into anybody's body ever. That's the impression I got from this. But it's crazy because I've never heard anyone consider this combo until recently, where some of you guys have been saying you tried it. Which, man, you either gotta do the extract or just have an iron stomach for this. But with the motion of moving, I could feel the nausea come into fruition even more. Like, it felt gross in a sense, but it was also super weird, because we were really starting to get dissociated in a way we never felt before. And this did help a bit with the feeling of pain, but not necessarily with the feeling of sickness. That was intensified greatly. I remember I told Evan that I might throw up and maybe pull over, but we were literally on my street at this point, so we just kept going to my crib. He was like, "Man, don't get sick on me, you're gonna make me want to throw up too." Which of course I didn't want to influence that by any means, but when you can't help it, you can't help it. In this situation, there was no chance of helping it. Things felt darker, and the next thing I knew, we're finally at my crib. And I just opened the door and just start yakking hard as fuck, with a ton of force. Projectile vomit to a T. This is probably the hardest I've ever puked. Not the longest or drawn out, but definitely the strongest. And the taste of it didn't help one bit. I puked like 4 or 5 times onto the curb and the street, and it has all my lunch with a mixture of red from the gel caps. It almost looked like puke meat, but wasn't. Just super gross. And I remember I looked over at Evan, and he was just covering his mouth, trying not to puke himself. But I finally gained some composure, grabbed my things, or at least I thought I did, and said peace out for now. I wanted to hurry up because it was the middle of the day, and I had no clue who might be out. But I told him to be careful, of course, because things were starting to get really wacky and dissociated. Evan would only make it slightly down my street before having to puke in a similar manner, which I didn't see this, and I can only imagine what someone must have thought if they saw that shit. But I make it into the crib and hope that my mom isn't up and about, and thankfully she wasn't, and I go straight to the bathroom. And I was anticipating I would puke more, which my stomach was still on 10 and I was sweating quite a bit, but I didn't puke at all inside and would only do some gagging for about 5 minutes. And this whole coma period is the reason why this is possibly the worst combination I've had. Looking back at it, it wasn't really that long, but super discomforting. I've only had singular drug experiences that rivaled this intense discomfort. But when I'm done with the toilet, I wash my mouth out and brush my teeth. And I don't feel my toothbrush on my mouth at all. In fact, I started to notice a much more pronounced dissociation than I have ever felt in my life at this point. Much stronger and on a different level than that 300 milligram dose we had before. Suddenly a weird sensation occurred, and I knew I had to go to my room quick to prepare for whatever this was. But I started feeling like I wasn't seeing just out of my eyes necessarily, but out of a third-person perspective of the objective world. Basically, I felt like I saw myself sitting down in my room, in my house, seeing it and the things in it in a way I never felt before. Things that I also noticed were that I didn't have much feeling at all. I remember sitting in my chair and not feeling myself sit down, or rest my arms on the armrest. Just complete numbness and void of physical feeling. And I have to admit, just coming into this and having never experienced such a kind of dissociation yet, I got slightly anxious and freaked out for a moment. I had to get somewhat accustomed and realize what this state was like. Because the thing is, no matter how much you read up on this, no matter how much you hear what other people had to say about it, the actual experience of a new substance class tends to always be novel in practice. A lot of things were going through my mind, like how I had to share this with people, and the fact that I couldn't believe the extent that these substances were taking me. But looking back at this, I do think that this was dominantly a DXM trip, as we only had a good half hour, 45 minutes at most, with the seeds in our stomachs. We had the extract in for about an hour, so they very well could have influenced this trip, and some of the events that occur later actually lead me to believe this may not have been fully DXM, just comparing my overall use with it, so it's hard to say. The combo no doubt made for one of the hellish come-ups ever though, but I noticed pretty quickly that I didn't have my phone with me anymore, and I started to try and look for it around my room like I had lost it. And my dumbass was looking for a good 5 to 10 minutes all over the place until I remembered there was no way it would be in my room. It had to have been in Evan's car, or I dropped it along the way. So I get an old phone I hadn't used in years going, and there's this slightly weird connection with DXM and technology, dissociatives in general I feel like. But as I'm waiting for that to charge, I figured I should try and see what music is like. And the first thing I go to turn on is Project Baby 2 by Kodak. Now everyone, let me tell you, if I haven't already, let me fucking tell you. If there's one rapper I'm gonna play off dissos, especially DXM in my experience, it would be Kodak. There's just something super appealing about his music and his voice while in that experience. And he would play a huge role in this trip, which that album dropped just a bit earlier that year too. But when it started playing, I just got sent into this world of euphoria, and right away, it reminded me of MDMA and when we listened to him off that. I was ecstatic for so many reasons at the time, mainly just at how incredible this experience was beginning to unfold. I couldn't believe that Robocop could bring so much magic. At the same time, I attempt to do research, which I am seeing double at this point when I'm seeing through my eyes like that. Somehow I managed to get some vital information concerning its serotonin properties and just understanding the dissociation and all a bit better. And with all this happening, it was almost empowering, because I got a view of what was going on and I instantly fell in love with it. It felt like this was something that was made for me. It being so alien and intriguing, but such a blast at the same time. I felt really awake at this point, and the sound around me started to echo and distort in ways, but the music was a constant euphoria and had clarity. I also felt kinda drunk, just because things were slurry in a sense and a bit wobbly, but more so in a hallucinatory way. Things were also vibrating a bit, but I remember going on my old phone, getting on the Wi-Fi and downloading Snapchat so I can hit up Evan about my phone. Before I hit him up though, Michael was calling me for some reason. I actually had a few missed calls from him. And if you don't know Michael, he's been in quite a lot of the past stories. He's a bro and he's a regular in these. But I answered him and said what's up. And when I talked, it felt so strange. Like I didn't even feel the words come from my mouth, or my mouth move or have any feeling. Which, it may not sound strange, but to actually lose that sensation, it can be really odd. It's something you may not even think about. Because the thing is with that, it didn't necessarily feel like my voice was coming from myself, but entered through the world through some other process. And that process was clearly being exhibited through dissociation. At first I thought I didn't even say anything, but I started to chat with Michael surprisingly. I told him what we did, and he laughed and said we were wild for that. But he hit me up actually wondering if I could spot him on an Uber, as he was deep in another town without a ride back. It took a fat minute, but I told him I would get him. And just saying this now, this is something I kinda hate to do while on DXM, at least when I get super messed up on it. And that's trying to get Ubers, Lyfts, or whatever. Like the whole process of setting up a ride digitally and having it actually occur in the world would be on a whole different level of bizarreness. Like the dissociation will even spread to that idea and your expectation of things. So when the ride actually comes, or whatever the case is, it's like mind-boggling and astonishing how this came to be. And also it would be kinda like a game of memory too. Like I would book rides and completely forget about them. People would be calling on my phone, and I would get pissed off thinking I was getting random spam, and would tell people to stop fucking calling because it would stop my music and interrupt the trip. But it takes me like 10 minutes or so just to download the Uber app and get into my account. And doing anything was just a process in that state. But I get the bro Michael a ride. I told Evan what was up though with my trip and how it developed, and of course how I left my phone. Then he told me what was going on with him, and how he felt super fucked up basically. He told me how he threw up and how he was experiencing a lot of similar symptoms as I was. And I'm going to try to explain the effects more here, just because there's so much that can go on, and so many different aspects of the experience to note. I remember drinking water felt super weird because of not having feeling in my mouth. And then the dissociation itself, I feel like, sets you up for both moments of astonishment and moments of euphoria. I was going through all Kodak's discography at the time, and just the level of in-tuneness I would feel from his music, the level of, let's fucking go, it's just absolutely insane. Like it felt like the perfect euphoria. And I'm probably going to say that multiple times here, just to emphasize just how strong this was. Because it was some of the most beautiful euphoria concerning music I experienced. Just listen to Tunnel Vision, man. With headphones, of course. And that beat, bro. especially when it just starts and comes in, it's the fucking shit. And the thing with Kodak, I feel like, is that his music is just made for the Dextroverse. He can play such a huge beautiful influence in a trip. Same thing with artists like Tame Impala, Mac DeMarco, Aphex Twins, and many others, which I also did tune into. Tame Impala sticking out the most, as his current album also did drop recently at this time. But then I remembered something weird happened. I tried to talk to my mom, seeing that I could talk to the homie Michael just fine, and somewhat being able to manage myself, despite feeling like I was busting hard. And I tried to run a sentence by her real quick, but I would get caught up in my tongue, and it was almost like I would dissociate the ability to pronounce certain sounds, which in result causes a bit of a slur. It isn't like an alcohol slur, it's like this wonky slur, a slur people won't necessarily suspect you're on something. So that was another effect that popped up, and I simply told my mom I was just having trouble pronouncing a few words at the moment. Also down the hallway, there was super strong tunnel vision, and it looked like my mom was almost a mile away in the living room. I was a little worried she might suspect something because of the slurring, but with the confidence the DXM brought me at the time, I was able to pull it through just fine. Then I would notice that certain objects in certain places of my surroundings would be either very large or very small, all depending on how I was looking at it. It would almost be like at times you would have no sense of distance between things, that everything could be popping in or away from your vision. Then just with this overall hue of red distortion was placed over my vision. To say the least, a lot was going on, and when the nausea was gone, it was really something. But anyways, I chatted with her briefly, and then I returned to my room to get in contact with Evan. Evan said that everything for him was vibrating and going in circles, and also he had a lot of similar effects as I did, like the numbness and strong dissociation. He obviously didn't make it to dance practice, and told me he went to his room after he got back, somehow in one piece. But in his room he lay down and said he felt like he was on the outside of his body, and then his mom walked in. She was asking him if he was going to go to practice or not, and when he said he talked, it didn't even feel like it was him talking, or that the words were coming out of him. But he told me he just put his head face down in his pillow and went on automatic, saying that he felt sick and had to lay down. We then also described having a slight altercation to our walk. For me it wasn't too bad at this dose, but for him it was almost like he couldn't walk. I asked him if I should bike over to his place or what the move was, since I still had to get my phone. Evan told me that he was on the way though, before I even had the chance to eject. He was saying he was going to come before the peak really hits. Because thing is, he promised one of our other friends that we picked them up from work that day, Isabel. I remember she was working at this Dunkin' at the time, which was like 15 minutes away from us. And he didn't even tell my ass this until I got into the car. But he pulled up in no time it seemed like, and I went outside. I remember seeing my puke from earlier as I got in, and I thought it would smell bad, but my smell was completely numbed. When I got in, we start going right away. Like he said, before it really hits too hard. But to be fair, it was already hitting really hard. I asked him over and over again if he was sure he was straight to get us there, and said he would be able to most likely. After this though, he would tell me that this is one of the most fucked up times he's ever been having to drive. So I just buckled up and hoped we weren't in for anything tragic. Which looking back at this, I definitely should have not let this happen. But we just went along with it and weren't in our right mind to try and figure out another alternative. So I put on some music, Kodak specifically, and we get locked into our seats like we were in a video game, and the car was a roller coaster. And a roller coaster is one of the best comparisons I can give this, like a fast moving one but in slow motion that could just speed up and steer off into nothingness at any moment. I remember half the time I was kinda just gripping on tight, because the whole thing just kinda put us on edge for obvious reasons. But anyways, we started moving and he pulled off my street, which he did say right away it was hard to keep straight, mainly because we didn't know what straight was. And I couldn't tell myself either if he was straight or not, because things would just distort all kinds of ways and sizes, with tracers all over the place, tunnel vision, and slight color alteration. Like part of me felt like we were about to crash and have a disaster on our hands. Then another part of me just vibes out to the music and figured we should be fine. Because a part of me did trust in Evan's ability. We didn't have his sister Grace this time to grab the wheel and make sure he was driving straight. and I couldn't help but feel like this was like our 1P LSD trip, but this time ruled by dissociation and being a lot stronger. But Evan makes it onto the main road and at the light behind a car, which he pretty much just sticks to. He mentioned turning was some of the most difficult moments, but thankfully there were only a couple turns, and most of it was a straightaway. But boy did this feel like one of the longest rides I've ever had while tripping. It felt like it took a half hour or 45 minutes, when I remember at most it was only 15. But this drive sticks out to me like a sore thumb when I think back to this trip. It was just so reckless and intense, especially with the music and everything. I remember having to turn the music down at points because I was worried it would throw his driving off. And it was a blur of gray outside, with the strong red hues we were getting, with everything being out of focus besides the backlights of the car in front of us. And everything else wasn't straight at all. We were deep in this ocean of dissociation. But somehow we managed through this, and he makes the turn at the light and into the Dunkin' Donuts we had to go to. We pull it to the side where there isn't anybody, and he ends up parking all crooked. But we had made it, and Evan just let out the biggest laugh ever and clapped his hands, so I know we just barely made it without fucking up. But Isabel was waiting, and she comes and asks us if we wanted something to drink, not even noticing yet how fucked up we were. We both told her just fine somehow, and she comes back a couple minutes later with drinks and donuts, which I was in no position to eat anything at the moment. But Evan's ass hopped in the back seat while she was gone. And when she came back, she looked at us, and she just knew. Then she started getting on her ass because we had taken the Robitussin again, telling us not to be doing that shit like that. Maybe because she didn't want to see us get hooked. Which, looking back at this and how often we were tripping off of it, I can understand her concern at this time. Then I brought up we took the seeds also, and she just thought we were nuts for that, seeing how shitty it made us feel the last time, and saying that we deserved that terrible puking episode. But we banter a bit before leaving and returning to the music. And of course the conversation at this point in time was always, how are we going to smoke today? Which, considering how hard we were tripping, Evan and I both agree we could use a bit of bud to help mellow things out a little bit. And of course I had a strong desire to, seeing how well the synergy went last time with cannabis. And I have to say, this is where things get kinda blurry. Not that things weren't already all over in my visual field. Evan and I did calm down more now that we weren't at risk of getting into a car crash since Isabel was driving. And I have to say this may be one of the main effects Evan and I noticed from the seeds, and that was some sedation. With all my experience with HBWR, they've always somewhat had a sedative quality about them, and I've always been able to sleep while on them whenever I wanted. Now DXM can also cause sedation at times, so ultimately, it was most likely a combination of the two. But we get back to Evan's place and pick up his sister, and we figured out a place we can go to and smoke. And that place was the Plug's house, as his girlfriend had actually invited us. I've been there a couple times before, and I'm pretty sure I brought it up in a story sometime. But we go over there, and the car ride doesn't really stick out to me. It's somewhat of a bore. What does stick out to me is when I get out and go inside the Plug's house. I just remember feeling so disoriented, and that the walls and everything about the house was ginormous. Like the 2-story house was 50 feet tall or something. This was especially the case the closer I got. And the colors at this point were actually super vibrant because the sun had come out for a little bit. Like the grass felt twice as green as it normally would be, or the wooden fence looked twice as brown. Kinda almost like a tropic overlay was placed on the colors. Then I remember we had to walk through the back of the house for whatever reason. And as we were getting in, the Plug had to hold back his pit bull in the backyard because they would attack strangers. And I remember I just kinda zoned out at this, with his pit bull just barking. It's something that sticks out pretty hard in my memory. I think it was just me taking everything in, and how that state made everything so alien, but so normal at the same time. Honestly, it reminds me of a perspective I may have had when I was a little kid, especially just concerning the motion of things and how novel it felt. But we go inside, and this is where Evan and I start to zoink out. We smoked, and that's when I really felt the sedation set in. Like, I remember talking a little bit, but once we were inside and sat on the couch, I couldn't help but feeling like laying back and closing my eyes. I definitely said fuck it once I saw Evan do it. And there were like 6 or 7 of us total, I think, and they continued to talk and hang out, also playing some games on the Xbox. And I wouldn't say my trip necessarily ended at this stage either, as when I closed my eyes and rested, I felt like I entered this void. There were only white and red lights I could see with my eyes closed, and they took over for the most part. They kinda had trails behind them, which I didn't think much of this, other than I could have possibly been entering a hole of some sort, as I had read up about K-holes before this, but this wasn't that. I was simply sedated and half asleep, and got some closed eye visuals. I remember their voices became drowned out somewhat and matched the vibe of the void I was in. While it was something, it felt like its purpose was nothingness. Evan would have a similar experience during this, but was more so in a dream state. Before I knew it though, we were getting ready to go, which it had been a good 2 or 3 hours of us just slumped on the couch. Even in the car, Evan was passed out. And I just wanted to get home, maybe eat something, and then knock out myself. So I did just that. I have to say, ever since we smoked, it was almost like my conscious awareness was dulled by like 75%, and I went on automatic, mainly just wanting to sleep. And I also think the timing of the trip set us up for that, as it was the evening at this point, and also the LSA of course. But yeah, that was one hell of an experience for us. Evan said he was possibly the highest he's ever been with this. As for myself, I have to say that this was probably the strongest trip I had yet at this point in time, considering it was a combo and how many different effects we got. The intensity and power was there, no doubt. It really opened us up to just how strong of a substance DXM can be, and we knew now not to fuck around with any nauseous combos moving forward, or plan things out so sporadically and recklessly. We would have many strong trips ahead of us, but this, I have to say, looking back at it, was a pretty significant learning experience, because finally, we would back off a bit from drugs after this mess. And when I say a bit, I really only do mean a bit, because just around the corner, I would have some very strong life-changing events yet to come. So we're gonna end this story here. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys want to see next, and check out my prior stories if you haven't yet. I'm excited for what we got in store, so stay tuned guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. It's been someone that's someone, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.